everybody get settled? And, yeah, shall we start? All right, let's do it. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Cheryl Stallings with the Apex Town Council, and I'd like to welcome you to our town's first panel discussion on women's issues to celebrate Women's History Month. The name of our event today is called Women's Issues, a dialogue of the past, the present, and empowering the future. Before we continue, I'd like to first just give thanks to 3 of our staff members who organized our event for today. Our town clerk, Ms. Donna Hosh, our deputy town clerk, Ms. Tessa Silver, and our communications manager, Ms. Stacy Galloway. So we really appreciate their efforts in organizing our event today. Now I'd like to introduce our panelists to you for today's event. Some of our panelists have provided detailed biographical statements that you can access on the town website. I'm going to be sharing some briefer statements during these introductions. First to my right, I'm going to start with Captain Ann Stevens, who gets the award for last minute showing up for us because she has stepped in because Mayor Pro Tem Nicole Dozier was planning to be on our panel but had a work conflict late yesterday afternoon, and so Captain Stevens was gracious enough to help us out and step in, and so we really appreciate that on such short notice. So to give you a little more information about Captain Stevens, she has been with the Apex Police Department since 1992. She has a degree in criminal justice, and she's married with 2 children. So welcome, Captain Stevens. To her right is Miss Emmy Hicks. Emmy is new to Apex, moving in last summer, although she has been in the Triangle since the winter of 2015. She's an avid reader, writer, and self-proclaimed geek, in your words. She loves downtime writing next to her girlfriend, who is also a writer. Emmy works for a local church administration, and when choosing a home in 2020, Emmy looked into Apex for supportive community that she found for queer people, especially parents. So welcome, Emmy. We're glad you're with us.
Thank you.
And to her right is Miss Kathleen, or Kat, Roblitz. Kat is a graduate of Harvard Law School, and she currently works as a staff attorney at Forward Justice, which is a nonprofit in Durham that is dedicated to racial and social justice in the South. Kat principally works on democracy advocacy and voting rights litigation in North Carolina courts. She lives in Apex with her husband and 2 children, ages 4 and 7. So welcome, Kat.
Thank you.
Okay, and circling now to my left is Dr. Ruth Steidinger.
Good job.
I'm going to struggle with the words. Sorry about that.
That's great.
So Dr. Steidinger is a leader committed to developing and supporting effective teachers. She began her career in Wake County as a high school math teacher and earned honors quickly in that role. Then she served as assistant principal and principal in 2 public schools before moving to central office in 2003, where she participated in a number of leadership and educational initiatives. In 2015, she became principal of Olive Chapel Elementary here in Apex. She is driven by her purpose to live intentionally and to work tirelessly. Her leadership has been recognized as the Wake County Principal of the Year in 2019 and the North Carolina Regional Principal of the Year in 2020. So welcome, Dr. Steidinger. I'm going to keep getting it. I'll keep working. Next, we have Ms. Barbara Collins. She and her husband, Dan Sigmund, are 26-year residents here in Apex, and they have 2 children and 4 grandchildren living here in the area. She recently retired from Duke University after 20 years of service. Along with her colleagues at Johns Hopkins, Michigan, MIT, Northwestern, and Stanford, she founded the Strategic Initiatives field of work. And she has wrote and spoken at national conferences related to brain science, diversity, energy, ethics, and capital project funding. And she served on the committee that developed the first flex time policy at Duke. So welcome, Ms. Collins. And then finally to my left is Council Member Audra Killingsworth. Audra is married to Matthew Killingsworth. They have 4 children, ranging from elementary age to college age. They have pets, including a Cocker Spaniel, a bearded dragon, and 2 ferrets. Councilmember Killingsworth is involved in a number of social justice efforts and initiatives. She belongs to groups such as the Triangle Free Thought Society and the American Humanist Association, and she's volunteered in a number of organizations, including Wake Crisis Ministries, Habitat for Humanity, and the Women's Center. And she is an occupational therapist, having worked in that role in that field for about 15 years, and is currently employed at Galbraith Health. Okay, so welcome, Councilmember Killingsworth. So thank you all for being here. We're going to go ahead and dive into some questions and get your opinions on some women's issues. Just to lay a couple of ground rules, I just want to say you can speak on any question that you want. If there's a question that you don't particularly care to contribute to, that is fine. I want this to be informative or informal, and just have some good conversation about women's issues, okay? So feel comfortable to say as much as you want, and I'll try to facilitate so we have equal time amongst all of us. I'm going to probably rotate, like on one side of the room I might start with one question, and this other side of the room maybe for the next question. Do you all have any questions before we get started? Okay, well let's dive in. First question. Let's begin by discussing women's roles, past and present. And in your view, how have women's roles changed, and how have they stayed the same over time? And do you think factors such as nationality, age, race, ethnicity, gender identity, or educational level impact women's roles? And that's a mouthful, I know. So let me start to the left, and would anyone like to respond to that sort of paragraph of questions?
I would have to say that what is the role of a woman is whatever we want it to be, but it is limited by our determination, by our opportunity, and by those people that are around us, whether we have a supportive group to assist us or not.
So support systems are very important, as well as, is the sky the limit in a way of what
It could be.
it could be? Okay. Anyone else on this side?
I just want to talk about how the role of women has changed in their lived experiences at work. So I stayed home for 7 years and then entered the workplace. And I was fortunate enough to have people who, when I applied to work, who valued the work that I did that I didn't get paid for, right? And so as I was describing the work that I'd done and things that I'd done when I'd stayed home and what my values were and what my schedule was, that allowed me to be able to get my first job back into the workplace again. And I think we all have to sort of learn from that women, everybody, right, are doing things in their communities, with their children, in their schools, that require executive level skills, lots of organizational, et cetera. And so one of the things that I think I've seen change for women is this, right? That we're valuing their entire contributions and we're listening to them in the workforce, in volunteer roles, et cetera. And that we can only learn to increase that as time goes on. But I think that we'll also find that the narrative in the workplace probably assigns more value to some roles than others. And so if you are in an underrepresented community, not necessarily this, but let's choose anything, right? Then you might be doing something that in the regular narrative at work maybe isn't being valued in the same way. So if you've been a volunteer working on voting rights in a largely Hispanic community, are you able to translate that when you go into an employment situation and say, I've done this as a volunteer, let me explain it to you. So I think we've got a lot of work to do, but I think we've also made a lot of progress.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Yes, ma'am, Dr. Sully.
Well, one thing to add, it's kind of germane to my personal experience. I'm the primary breadwinner in my family. And I think that's a shift that's certainly been made. The recognition and the respect for that probably hasn't grown as much as I'd like to see it grow. I spent several years at central office, and I had male colleagues that did roles just similar as mine and made more money than I did. And so that's one thing that hasn't necessarily changed, and also in the world of education, as I think is true in other organizations. There's a ceiling. I mean, we see a lot of women in the classroom, And we're starting to see more women in senior level positions. I was in senior level positions, but there are also things, the landscape starts to change once you get past the senior director level. And I think that's true. Hopefully that will continue. It is changing. The diversification is changing some, but opportunity's not quite as much as I like to see it change.
Very good, thank you. Anyone on this side of the room have anything to add? Go ahead.
So currently I'm a single mom, by choice. I left a marriage that was not working, and kind of went out on my own. I do have a wonderful loving girlfriend, but I'm still the parent in my family. Prior to that, I was not a mom who ever wanted to stay home with her kids. And so there was a lot of, I think, cultural pushback, especially because at the time I was living in Miami, where traditional gender roles tend to take a far more sort of mainstream approach. But I had a family, in-laws, other people in my community, friends, neighbors, who really pitched in and kind of helped to allow me to pursue a career and keep working while I wanted to, even when I had children. But I do think that both of these roles are very different. And these days there's still a lot of thinking about, single parents, especially single women in a lot of ways, and women who don't want to do traditional things like mother their children. There were a lot of questions like, well, why? Do you not like being a mom? Questions like that came with it, and it really had nothing to do with that, and was more just about like a multifaceted part of my identity that really needed to shine through. Another thing that I want to say that really speaks to the second half of this question is like idea of intersectional feminism, which I think is a very misunderstood term, but it's an incredibly important one. I am a queer woman, and I can be not one or the other at any time, right? I am always queer, and I am always a woman. I face my own set of challenges. I'm also white. We have black women stereotypes that, they're hard workers and they're tough, and so if they can't provide, then they just need to get extra jobs. But white women are sort of pushed into staying home with their kids. So my experience was not the same as someone else. We look at the violence that happened in Atlanta towards, Asian American Pacific Islander group of women, and how, those groups of women tend to be sexualized in a certain way. And so when we talk about intersectional feminism, we can't say, we have to understand that feminism in general tends to embrace what it means to be a white, cis, het woman. And by that I mean cisgender, heterosexual, white woman. So, going forward, if we're going to do anything about growing the presence of women in the world and their power and their roles and equality and equity and all these things, we have to really start there and start looking at what it looks like to approach people within the stereotypes that they are met at, so that we can counter those, but also support people when it's, something that's cultural and important and certain things, so really sort of embracing all those differences and understanding that, women, I say this a lot, but not all groups are a monolith, right? So being able to say, where do we find each individual person, and where can we address these, sort of groupings? Because you can't ever not be both, Black women don't face the same things as black men, nor do they face the same things as white women. So, queer women, the same thing. It's all very different. So we really need to make sure that we're approaching it from that point. So the ideas of nationality, age, ethnicity, all of these things absolutely matter in terms of how we view women, and which groups have not had their roles change. We talk about, women run the right to vote. Well, no, they didn't. White women won the right to vote then. It was decades later that, women of color were allowed to. So really making sure that we are phrasing how we approach these roles in ways that are sensitive to this, I think is really just the baseline of the entire conversation.
Yeah, I feel like one of my favorite quotes is just that white feminism was built on the backs of black women. And I think that you have to just hear that and think about it, and if that seems surprising to you, research it and just sort of realize that a lot of feminism is white feminism, or has been, and how to kind of change that going forward. And I think, everyone's got their own sort of angle to it. I mean, I'm mixed race, but I'm also white passing, and I think that's an important privilege, that I could walk into the room and you wouldn't immediately say, you're not white. So I think everyone just comes at it from their own angle, and I think it's always important. That's always gonna be a part of it. And I think in terms of what hasn't changed, I think a lot of it is the roles at home. They've shown that even as women are both having a job with men or even making more than men, they just still aren't doing less at home. And I think there's also a cultural element to that. In a lot of cultures, there's an immense pressure to keep up certain roles. Even if you work, that doesn't mean you shouldn't be making dinner every night. And so I think that's probably one of the biggest things that hasn't changed, and I think there's differences amongst cultures, but I think the data just shows that men have only done a little bit more at home in, straight relationships, and women have sort of kept doing a lot, even if they're out working 50 hours a week.
Second shift phenomenon, as they often call it, that you come home from your first job, you take on your second one, parenting.
Which is a full-time job.
Exactly.
Would you like to add anything?
For me, I obviously am in a male-dominated, job, and one of the, I've risen through the ranks over the years, and now sit as a captain, at the police department, but I have never felt the demand, I guess, like y'all are talking about. Like, I'm the breadwinner in my family as well. I make more money than my husband does. I make more money than my male colleagues do who are in the same rank. And some of that is because I've been there longer and it's time. And I think there's multiple factors that play into that. It's not just they make more, I make more because I'm a female than they do. I think there's multiple factors that have to be looked at. And, I have a great spouse, and he has been wonderful. I do come home, and there's some days I don't want to cook dinner. I'm like, I'm tired and I don't want to cook dinner. And my husband cooks dinner, or my husband takes kids to the ball practice, or, I might take them to ball practice, or he takes them to the orthodontist, or I take them to the, for me, I feel like that role has been very equally divided in my house. So I don't feel the pressures of, I don't think I could stay at home and be a stay-at-home mom. That's just me. I don't think I could do that. I love my children immensely, but I just don't think I would have been as good a mom if I'd have been a stay-at-home mom. Not that there's anything wrong with being a stay-at-home mom by any means, just for me, that wasn't the path I chose. But I don't feel like I've lost out on my children's lives and what's going on. I think they still, we still talk, and we still talk every night, and, all that kind of stuff. So I don't feel like I've lost out by being in a demanding job. So, I don't know if it's just the career I'm in, it becomes a little different, or, but I haven't felt some of those, pressures that y'all have discussed. I haven't felt those. That's, that's just me. But I think I'm fortunate I haven't experienced what Dr. Seidinger has and been in the same level and, not equal pay. And, I might be the anomaly because I make more than my male counterparts, and and I make more than my husband, and he could care less. I'm very fortunate when it comes to that. So.
Well, it sounds like, as several of you have pointed to, there's definitely been progress, and then maybe in some areas there's still work to be done, but it's nice that we can celebrate the progress that we made. So, yes. And this maybe dovetails a little bit the second question. How have women's rights, gender equality, gender equity evolved over time? Can you share a little bit more about what achievements do you think have been celebrated, and what do you think work might still need to be done? If anyone wants to, we're going to start on this side this time. Would anyone like to share any responses there?
Well, I will say in my career field, obviously, women didn't become a big part of law enforcement until the 80s. They were a part of law enforcement earlier on than that, but there were specific roles they were set out to do, which was to be juvenile investigators, and you had to wear skirts. And as a matter of fact, we just posted a job ad that we had found from like the 50s, looking for women for law enforcement. And they had to be hefty, and they had to be spinsters, and they could never marry, and it was all these different things. And we've evolved so much from there. So you don't have to be all those things now. You can be a mom or a single mom, or it doesn't matter. And so that has definitely changed, and I think now, you are seeing many more women lead as chiefs, major law enforcement departments, huge, you know, metropolitan agencies that, you know, historically, you know, would have never been. Their job was to be a juvenile investigator kind of tucked in the corner, and now they're leading major organizations. So I think that's definitely been a change that has come through the years, and, you know, as the years grow, we continue to see more and more. You know, Wake County, you know, just in the Wake County area, I mean, there's 5 or 6 women police chiefs, which when, you know, I started was unheard, you know, I didn't know any women police chiefs, and now, you know, there's 5 or 6 within 15 miles from here. So I think that definitely in my career field has changed and progressed.
Either one of you like to comment before we move to the?
I mean, I would agree that I think that women in leadership positions has certainly increased, you know, not everywhere. I think there's still, you know, STEM professions that have really sort of struggled, but I think that, you know, it's one thing to see a lot of women graduating from college at even like higher rates, like 8% above men now, and to see them get the entry-level jobs, but what's tough is that a lot of organizations, that diversity just gets lost. The higher you go up, it's just white men, right? And I think there's definitely been a lot of improvement in that. I don't think it's where, you know, we're not there, but I think there are definitely women who have so many positions now that they never would have had, you know, real, true high-up leadership positions in a lot of different fields.
I think for me, coming from a slightly different perspective, one of the things that sort of shocks me on a relatively frequent basis is when I'm scrolling on social media sites or, you know, doing obscure research for books, I come across, you know, women from history who did remarkable things that I just had no clue existed, or things that, you know, we use every day that were invented by, you know, a woman, or that sort of thing, and how, you know, history tends to be written by the winners. And I really love that unpacking, because I think, so both of my children are girls, and wanting to sort of, you know, show them these really amazing role models and other women through, you know, sort of been these trailblazers throughout time and all this great stuff. It's so amazing how many of them there have been that we just don't know about. And so, you know, I would love to see those parts of history unearthed and taught more. You know, like, I want to see their curriculums not just in March, but like all year long, you know. So here's, you know, one person, and these 3 people all did that, and, you know, you better put a woman on there at least somewhere, you know, like, because there's just so much like, look at this guy who did this thing. Well, yeah, but he totally got that from this lady over here, you know. So I really would like to see, you know, more of those stories brought to light, so that then we can share those with young kids, and not just girls, but boys too, so that their understanding of history and the future isn't just men make decisions, men get things done. Because, you know, they do, but so do women. And to sort of show both sides of these is really, I think, one of the things that I would like to see change in education and in pop culture. You know, like seeing those stories being told more. Like, now we celebrate when a movie like Hidden Figures comes out, you know, but like, why is it a rare thing, you know? So being able to sort of tell those stories more is something I really want for my children.
Right, so you're speaking about education, so Dr. Study, can I come over to you?
Yeah,
and let
please.
you share?
Yeah, well, I want to celebrate the fact that we have the first woman superintendent who also is minority, and she is amazing. So that's absolutely be celebrated. Similar to Captain Stevens, when you go back and look at history with who was in the classroom and there was the expectations of women, because it was all women in the classroom. That is evolving. It is hard. I have 3 men on staff in the classroom. That's it. I'd love to see more, because I think we need greater representation of what I think the young people need to see, somebody like them standing in front of them doing the myriad of jobs that we have. I was excited about the Title IX work that was done particularly for women in sports. It is a shame that the U.S. women, I don't think they did get the equal pay that they touted for, but that's something that should have happened. But we've made progress, we have. I mean, we have made progress. We're not where we need to be in education, but we've certainly made progress. And to your point, that is one of my biggest pet peeves. We don't celebrate, minorities in a certain, or majorities in a certain month. We teach and try to make sure that we show perspective in all that we do. So the young people sitting in front of us, they deserve that. They deserve to see people looking like them in books, and see the accomplishments of people looking like them in history. And so we are very intentional about that work. I think the county in general works hard to do that. I'm not opposed to having a month where we emphasize women. I'm not opposed to that at all, or other marginalized groups. But let that be a layer on top of what we do on a day-to-day basis.
Very good, thank you. Ladies?
So I did my graduate work on the suffrage movement, and I intentionally did that so that I could understand the rhetoric that was used during that time and the deliberate way in which they went about offloading African American women during that time. And it was very enlightening for me to work through that process because it was intentional. And so this idea that your turn is coming is something that I have sort of railed against, both in my career and my personal life and everything else, because we have gone from a group that said white women will gain status rights, marriage equality, right? Lots of things that have happened around white women. And we have left behind and said, wait, right? Your turn's coming to everybody else. But now we're part of the problem. So those of us who are in leadership roles have to be intentional about everything that we're doing, from the hiring to promotions to salaries to what happens in the classroom and everything. Because we've gained this, and it's not okay to say, you have to wait your turn anymore. So I think with the progress, we actually have to continue to do our work. And I would love to see that be the focus of women's initiatives and women's rights, to focus on people who've been traditionally disenfranchised.
I would say that, one piece of the, equality and equity that we're starting to have more of a conversation about is healthcare. So these healthcare inequities that have been long-standing have led to things like high Black mother maternal deaths, and Black children dying, and things like that we're seeing come out in studies. And I think that it's a consequence of what you were just saying, wait your turn. Because we end up putting through in the healthcare field nurses, doctors, and other practitioners who come out not understanding the difference between healthcare with a white woman and healthcare with a Black woman, not understanding the cultural differences, not understanding that there are some differences that you as a healthcare provider have to adjust to and have to rethink in order to make sure that all of those questions get answered. There's two stories that I would love to share, one of which is from a friend and one is my personal story. They're both healthcare issues, and it just, it kind of shows we have quite a long way to go with equality with men's issues and women's issues. This first one belongs to a friend, and I've removed all of the personal information here. For over 8 years, I have struggled with intermittent pain and discomfort in my chest due to changes in my breast tissue after having my child. I went from a small B cup to a full D. That should be great, right? No, it's not. Over the last 2 years, it has turned into chronic pain. My frame and chest muscles have been traumatized and cannot support the weight and the pulling. I experience pain when I shave my legs, paint my toenails, tie my shoes, pick up things, work out, run, yoga, etc. If it's bending over, it hurts, not only during the activity, but for hours or days following. I take over-the-counter pain medicine every single day. The only slight relief I have is wearing 2 sports bras at the same time 24/7. This leaves me with shoulder pain, rashes, and I still have pain with the listed activities. After jumping through hoops for 2 years with my primary care doctor doing all of the things, I was referred out to a plastic surgeon. The first plastic surgeon I saw was in Cary. He didn't measure me. He took photos, told me how great my figure was and how pretty I would look and feel in a bikini and sundress, telling me that I wouldn't have to wear a bra. He handled them and showed me by cupping my breasts what they would look like. He then told me insurance wouldn't cover it because what he said I needed was a lift and I would have to pay out of pocket. Gave me a quote of around $6,100. I went to my car and I cried. I felt violated by the doctor who sexualized me and completely ignored my pain. This isn't for vanity, it's about quality of life. Weeks later, I shared my experience with a couple of close friends and primary care doctor and decided to get a second opinion. This doctor listened, he was sympathetic and understanding, and on paper I met every criteria for insurance to cover the procedure except for one. I missed the measurement in which I am 4 centimeters short of qualifying for an insurance claim. Furthermore, insurance would require a minimum amount of tissue to be removed, which is almost all of my breasts, leaving me with a small A cup. I would be left with essentially nothing. After this consultation, I sat in the office with the office manager, in which she gave me a quote of $8,500. My heart broke all over again, and I went to my car and cried. For a few minutes, I sat there and compared the prices in my head and felt that if I went to the first doctor, I would have a significant amount of money, but be scared of being unconscious in his care. I'm sitting here saying, well, I can save over $2,000, although he could very well be inappropriate with my body, and that may be the best option to gain some quality of life. To put this in perspective, a man can get a scrotoplasty. It is covered by 104 out of 124 insurance companies with little criteria. A woman who is in chronic pain due to her breast has less than a 12% chance of having insurance cover reduction. The system is broken, and women's health care continues to fail. My personal story is that about 4 years ago, I went to my gynecologist with a complaint of heavy periods and swelling to the point that I looked like I was pregnant. I'm not talking about ongoing issues all my life, but it was a change over that year before preceding that. He immediately dismissed my concerns, saying that it was completely normal. It's completely normal to have to change sanitary protection and clothing multiple times a day due to breakthrough at maximal level and swelling that makes you look pregnant. Because of his automatic dismissal, I began to question myself. And I just let it go. It was my husband that made me seek a second opinion at least a year later. I went to a new gynecologist prepared with pictures and detailed notes and made sure I was really prepared. I never even got that far. As soon as the new doctor heard my issue, she started talking about solutions. I was shocked, I listened, and we made a plan. And once I got to my car, I broke down and I cried. I was believed and I was trusted without having to prove myself. That is not an unusual story. I am on Facebook groups with women who share horrific stories, much, much worse than what you've heard here. And, you know, I know that there are issues out there that are a lot worse with people being ignored and being told everything is just fine, everything is normal, or being told that once can hit your confidence so much that you just don't bother to bring up issues that are much more serious later. So I felt like it was important enough to bring up.
Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, thank you so much. So the examples of a lot of work to be done in healthcare for sure. Thank you for sharing that. So the next question is, and you all have touched on this some, are there more, is there more to add about what are the biggest issues facing women today in your judgment? And we'll start back over here if anyone would like to address that.
Well, I have several. I mean, the whole patriarchy thing is an issue, particularly in the political arena. Just fostering the perception that women are less. Some of the misogynistic comments that are made about women. I think about Elizabeth Warren, when she was stating her objections to the confirmation of Senator Jeff Sessions, and when Senator Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, I mean, that whole, we know how that came out, played out, and his whole, nevertheless, she persisted when she was told to be quiet. I mean, just, this whole dichotomy that exists of how we describe women who display certain characteristics and how we describe men who display certain characteristics. I personally have been told that I'm pushing my agenda by a man, and got reprimanded for that, whereas the irony was that the two people that were actually pushing the agenda were left unscathed by the whole thing. And so it's just, we aren't allowed to show ambition sometimes, and it's incredibly frustrating because if you don't, I'm not a demure woman, I'm not going to be one that sits back and I will speak my mind. But that's something that I've been a target over many years because I am a woman that speaks her mind and am ambitious. And I wish that there was a way that men, women, whomever, women do it to women too. It's not just men doing it to women. Women do it to women. I've experienced that firsthand as well. When you're trying to climb the ladder, so to speak, there's some women want to cut the legs out from underneath you. And so, I mean, that's a real issue. And so how do we, and we'll get to this later, but how do we tend to that in the workplace that makes it a safe place for people to be who they are, and show their assertiveness and be recognized and applauded for that as opposed to penalized?
So I'll share a story that's regarding and where privilege and leadership matters, because you get to a certain role and you have the right to speak out, right? So the higher you are in your organization, the more you have a right to speak out. So my boss at Duke, who I will not name, but I'm sure if anybody's listening to this, they can guess, a long time ago, my mentor actually, also my mentor, we were walking on campus and he told a filthy joke, right? I don't mind a filthy joke, right? Whatever, but it was too filthy for me. So we were walking across campus, two people who were visiting, my boss and myself. And after he's finished with the joke, I was like, that's totally inappropriate. I hope you never say, and he was like, oh, come on, you don't have a sense of humor. And I said, if you turn around and walk the other way, you're eventually gonna find a cliff you can jump off. That's how much I care about what you're saying right now. But you're thinking in that moment, like, yes, I'm personally offended, but if I don't say anything, then everybody who comes after me can't, right? So you'll hear the same theme from me, that those who are in a position to make change have to make change, and they have to do it in every situation they're in. And so yes, that's my agenda. Yes, people roll their eyes at me, but they'll still have to do it because they have no choice. So if women who are in leadership positions don't do it, we cut the feet out behind every woman who's not in that role, or anybody without the power to say it. So
I 100% agree, and it needs to be supported by anybody that's above that woman who's trying to speak their mind, and that needs to be respected, and the voice needs to be heard.
right.
Councilmember, do you want to add anything?
So to me, the biggest issues facing women today have to do with pay disparity. We still have studies coming out all the time talking about the pay gap, not only for white women, but women of color, Latinx women. And, it definitely prohibits women from being independent as much as possible. In my opinion, if we had, if it was public, if everything across the board was made public about pay, you would know how much to ask for. When you're looking at your colleagues, you would know what you need to aspire to. You would know the difference between the person who sits beside you making $10 more an hour than you do and having less education than you do. I've been I've seen that personally. Not everybody has that, but there is a significant portion of the population that unfortunately deal with that. I also feel like things like knowledge and consent, specifically related to healthcare, are also big issues. And when, part of that is back to the two stories that I told earlier, but speaking as someone who's trained in pelvic health therapy, there are related issues with knowledge and access to healthcare that are either denied us or having us search for a needle in a haystack in order to find the answers that we need. And we shouldn't have to do that. You know, what's normal and what's not is not generally talked about except in your close girlfriend circles, and you don't necessarily have all the answers for that. Things like consent, specifically related to OBGYN care. Let's talk about birth real quick. So we still do not have proper consent procedures during birthing in the U.S. and a lot of the countries in the world don't have that. It started out, I believe, in Germany and the Netherlands, where they're actually starting to have consent during procedures. Not every woman wants that. Some women want the doctor to take care of it during birth, and that's perfectly fine. But having the knowledge to understand, you know, do you want the whole picture? Do you want to know what's going to happen if you have to have an episiotomy, if you have to have a C-section, if you have to have a forceps birth? And the pelvic health issues that go along with that for the rest of your life can be damaging to the point where you're incontinent for the rest of your life. Did you know that? Did your doctor talk to you about that? Probably not. So those consent issues, to me, are a big thing that we need to talk about. And it started out because women were considered to be hysterical during birthing issues and were not allowed to make their own decisions when it came to that. So I would think we're beyond that, but we're not quite, because we still don't have those consent issues taken care of currently. Thank you. Anyone on this side of the room want to comment?
I mean, I agree with everything you said. I used to run support groups for moms, and one of the biggest issues that we faced a lot were women that felt violated by their birthing care providers. And it was almost everyone in the groups. And this was just regular mom support groups, you know, but people would come along and say, you know, they said something to my husband and said, you know, do you really want her to suffer like this? You should convince her to have a C-section now before she gets too far along. Or, you know, other things, medically unnecessary, you know, like there are people who feel empowered by choosing C-sections, way to go. But if that's not what you're in there for, you know, the bullying, the fact that it's cost motivated, you know, hospital care, medicine in America, the worse off you are, the more everybody gets paid. You know, there's not a lot of preventative care incentive, and women tend to suffer the most from that. I think on another side, one of the things that I see facing women a lot is sort of the expectation of what a woman is supposed to be. We have, you know, like, as a queer woman, as a member of the LGBTQIA+ community, you know, women look really different in a lot of my life. And, you know, I have, that includes transgender women, cisgender women, you know, intersex people, absolutely that, you know, how you wear your hair, how you dress. And then within those lines, what then is, you know, how do those fit into where, you know, the male gaze works? You know, like one thing that I read a year or two ago was someone talking about the idea, you know, this asking for it, and how a woman is dressed and whether that, you know, incites sexual violence. And, you know, one thing that I read that just struck me so hard is that if you are perpetrating that belief, then you are basically saying that somewhere else there is a woman who is less sober, dressed less modestly, walking on a less well-lit street, who deserves more to be a victim of sexual violence than the person who is not doing that. And that just shook me, that it was a comparison as opposed to just, you know, like we are all taught how to not, you know, have this stuff happen to you. And it happened to me. And I'm sure it's happened to other people sitting in this room. But, you know, who walks with keys between their fingers at night at 36 years old? I do. Because this is stuff that's the reality of my situation. And so, you know, like, we spend so much of our time catering to misogyny and patriarchal standards and that sort of thing, that really a lot of women's identity is defined by what men think of us. And that is historical, you know, that goes back, and that's not something that's gonna get fixed over time. But that's definitely an issue. And I mean, the other part of it is sort of the expectations and the treatment of women who don't fit the mold. I'll tell a story. Last weekend, we went to the farmer's market. We decided to have lunch at the NC State seafood restaurant, right? So my girlfriend and my daughters went and picked out a table outside, and I went in to get the meal. Now, it was one of those tables where there's 2 picnic tables kind of end to end, and there was no one on the other side, and then a couple came and sat down. And when I came out and joined the family, they got up and left. And my girlfriend and I just looked at each other and went, yep, because they weren't waiting for the dad. You know, it looks harmless to them until they realize what the family unit really looks like. So when you continuously have to prepare yourself for what a woman is supposed to look like, act like, be like, you know, who she's supposed to be with, how she's supposed to, you know, all of these things, it's just, there's so many narrow, you know, parameters, and we are growing, but there's still a lot of work to do, and that sort of perspective of how a woman is supposed to be is damaging in so many ways across the board.
Yeah, I feel like what's interesting is being in law, it's sort of, I'm sure people will tell you, okay, like 50% of people coming out of law school are women, but who's running everything? It's men and it's white men, and I think we have all this lip service to wanting equality, both for genders and racial equality, but I feel like it's just that, it's lip service. People want to have people in to get their numbers and say, look at this beautiful picture. I mean, I've worked many places, and I'm not going to name them. They go around the room and find whoever looks the most diverse, and they round them up for the photos for the website, right? And they put them up, and usually it's a white woman, usually who's head of diversity, who, you know, talks about how great everything is. Did you see how many people we hired? But who's still there in 10 years? And did you let those people speak in meetings? Did you ever value their ideas? Why did they leave? And I think that's not an uncommon story. And I think a lot of it comes to men. You know, they have the power, and I wish they didn't have as much power as they do, but they have to really stand up for women, let them speak in meetings, try to figure out not just some training on how not to discriminate against people, because that's not enough. They've shown that everyone has unconscious biases, and attending some training and then telling yourself like you've learned how to not discriminate doesn't do anything. You need a training on how are you lifting up and hiring women, women of color, men of color. What are you doing to lift them up to where you are, not just bringing them in and letting them sit in the meeting that you run. And they do all the work and you take all the opportunity. So I just think that, I think in law, but in a lot of places, people have to do more than just hiring people and just getting the numbers and putting it on their website and being like, great job today. Because it's not enough.
Okay, anything? All right, we've got about maybe 8 minutes left, so I'm gonna, I figured it was gonna be this way, and that's a good thing, so I'm gonna skip that.
It's till 6:30, so you're okay.
Oh, we do have it at 6:30. Oh,
Yes, ma'am, so you're okay.
thank you, so we're doing good. Thank you so much, Ms. Silver. Thank you. Okay, so we are doing very good then, so I'm not gonna have to skip so much.
Can I make one more comment?
Sure.
So, one of the things that I feel like is also very important is, and we've kind of danced around this in our talk, but until we look and we see, you know, that women are 50+% of the population, until we see in leadership and in our elected officials at all levels of government, at least 50% in charge and having those conversations, in charge of the meetings, talking about what's important and making those policies, you know, I don't think we're there. I think once we get there, then we can say, you know, we're approaching where equality needs to be.
So let's go to the media. Let's talk about the media and how do you all think women and girls are portrayed in the media? Let's start on this side. Anybody want to comment there?
Well, I would say, you know, I have two boys, and I sometimes am stunned at what I see on social media platforms on how young girls, young women behave. And that is something they can control, in my opinion. You know, I don't get out there and dance around, which nobody wants to see that anyway, but in a, you know, in a skimpy bathing suit and, you know, do TikTok videos and all that kind of stuff. Even when I, you know, had that figure, I wouldn't have done that because that's not what I would want myself to be portrayed at. So I am a little, I think women have to be more conscious of themselves and how they are portraying themselves. I do think the media tends to sometimes sexualize women in a way they probably shouldn't, but it's also, you know, I can choose not to make that video. I can choose not to go on social media and do some of the things that I see young women do that unfortunately does make them draw some negative attention toward them, instead of being on there and being positive and being on there and lifting up other women. And, you know, each of you kind of had mentioned that, and, you know, I would say, you know, as a leader in my agency, I do my best to try to mentor the women that we do have, and, you know, take them and talk to them. And I've had long talks to all of them about their legacy. And when you leave, what do you want your legacy to be? Because you set that stage of what you want it to be in the things that you do and how you treat people and all those kind of things. And so, you know, even starting out that young, you know, what do you want your legacy to be? And if you want your legacy to be remembered in 10 years of you dancing around half naked on TikTok, well, that may be what your legacy is, but that's a choice you made. So, you know, we have to teach young women to be more valued of themselves and to realize I can get out there and dress very professional like Dr. Steininger is and give positive messages and make that go much further than me dancing around in a bikini.
So I had like, oh, no, go ahead, I've already talked, go ahead.
So I guess my response to that is there are plenty of ways to let that TikTok bikini-clad video be an empowering thing for a woman who chooses to make it. And it isn't always, you know, a bad thing. I think that this comes from the disparity of women's sexuality and how it is something that should not be celebrated. The fact that, you know, lie there and take it may still not be the #1 phrase. It's still, like, a lot of women's sexuality is rooted in that behavior. And, you know, it's like the basis of it is that you probably feel incredibly empowered by certain kinds of behavior that reflect on you, where other women, myself included, feel empowered by other things. But, like, I didn't wear a low-cut shirt because in my head I go, well, it's not going to make me look professional. But really, like, that's just me catering to a certain mindset, right? Like, you know, I had jobs where part of what made me feel powerful, special, you know, like beautiful, whatever, was being able to reflect, like, sort of my femininity in a way that was right for me, right? I tend to be a little more on the femme side, you know. I know plenty of other women who are not. And however those, like, this is why it's important to say, like, every woman can express their, you know, their sexuality, their femininity, their inner, you know, whatever you want to call it, in a way that feels right for them, is good. Because that is opening up the path to women being able to be who they really are. And that it isn't just certain types of outfits that will get you the job, or, you know, only get you for the job for this. And part of that also is, like, negating the male gaze again. You know, like, I have 2 daughters, and for a long time, and this is something I still struggle with, you know, so they wear dresses every once in a while. Well, do we put shorts on under the dresses? Well, if we do it, why? Because the other kids are going to look at, well, are we telling them they have to wear shorts, or are we telling the other kids, like, stop looking at my kid's dress? What's the real problem? And so in that sense, like, there are absolutely good reasons to be, mindful and cautious and understanding of, both the idea that if something's on the internet, it never dies, and, young people making decisions, when they're 19, in Cabo is different than, someone at 35 is different than someone at 55, and so on, and, wisdom and growth and the things that we learn and the experiences, and yes, all of that. But, we all have our own version of what feels good for us. And, if we can start combating the fact, like, some women might put on the bikini just so they can get guys who think that's hot. But other people might do it because they think, I'm hot. And, like, that's the narrative that I think we need to push, and sort of encouraging women to feel okay in what feels right for them, And, sometimes I see people saying, well, why would you ever let, your 8-year-old put on makeup now? And I used to be that person, because I thought that if she wore makeup as a little girl, that it would make her think that she couldn't be beautiful without it. Well, I wear makeup once a month. You know what I mean? She is the sparkly princess, everything covered in glitter, makeup. So instead, I just taught her how to put on makeup that wasn't like, all over her face or whatever. And I let her wear it every once in a while when she really wants to. And it hasn't affected her, you know what I mean? But it does make her feel like I've done something extra to commit for something, and it makes me feel pretty in this moment when I'm going to this place. So, like, letting her own the way that she approaches the world, especially during these important moments, is really, I think, key to her being able to say, I get to make these choices about my body for myself. So I think that, like, well, absolutely, there is empowerment in modesty. Like, there are plenty of women, in the Muslim community who feel so empowered by some of the garments that certain, types of Islam use. And then I know Muslim women who don't, and they wear other types of clothes. And there's a lot of variety there, and that's okay. And so being able to say that, you are allowed to have these different types of expression, and that's all great and wonderful because women are beautiful in every way. I think that's an important message that we need to be giving to people.
I think it's about why you're doing it, right? That's the whole point, is that I think if we talk about, like, if you're doing something because you want to do it and that's the woman you want to be, then it's a great thing. It, like, whatever it is, right? Like, as long as you're not harming anybody else, like, whatever you want to wear and whatever you want to go out in the world, I would say, like, why don't we put pressure on men to not say, I'm not going to hire someone because I found some video they did 20 years ago.
Exactly.
Like, I mean, this is a totally innocuous video even, but I don't know if you guys remember that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez got a lot of flack for some dancing video, like with a college dancing group, like nothing even sexual about it. And they tried to take that against her and say, I don't know what they were trying to say, but I think it's just, I think the point is, though, is that, we do, unfortunately, because of just safety, we have to teach people to be careful about what they put out online. I think those are two separate conversations, right? Like, you should be able to do whatever makes you feel empowered as a woman, but for your own safety, unfortunately, the world we live in, and as parents, we have to be very careful about what gets put out in a public space, not because of being judged, but because of just personal safety and concerns about sexual assault and sexual violence. So I think it's two totally different conversations.
I just want to take a little bit, the thing that frustrates me is when you're watching things like the inauguration. I appreciate the outfits, but that's what we talk about with women, is the outfit that they're wearing, and we don't hear anything about that with the men.
We did about Bernie.
We sure did.
The exception.
Yeah, he's everywhere. But yeah, that's the thing that I do appreciate. I have an appreciation though for many vendors who are out there working to show different body types. I am grateful for that. I think there's several of them that have done a fantastic job in, I just saw a Peloton video the other day. It was a woman that most people would consider to be overweight, and she is on the front page of their thing doing a workout. And I'm like, yes, absolutely, great. But yeah, that's the thing that annoys me, is that whenever we're watching a historical moment and we're talking about an amazing outfit, that Kamala Harris is wearing. And, I mean, they
And she's the first female vice president, and it's like, but who did your dress come from?
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
right.
So the only thing I want to add to this is getting women comfortable making money, right? There's nothing wrong with money.
I'm very comfortable with it.
Me too. Yeah, I'm very comfortable making money.
I don't know what it's like.
So there's a monetization that goes along with TikTok and Instagram and everything else. And if they put on a bikini, they get 100,000 followers. And if they don't put on a bikini, they have 5,000 really impassioned followers. I don't know if that's actually true, but you get the idea. So in one of those scenarios, they make $100,000, and one they make none. I think it's okay for women to say, I'm gonna do things that are comfortable for me because I can do them and also make money. Absolutely, in my mind, nothing wrong with that. And if they are doing things that are going to challenge them later, hopefully they're gonna earn enough money to empower themselves out of, pay for their education, do whatever they're doing. Some of the conversation we're having, and we might get to this too, is about generational sharing and the role of moms in the family and dads in the family and brothers and sisters and cousins and grandmas and everything else. So my husband retired 5 years ago in order to take care of our grandchildren because our children had big jobs and somebody had to do it so that we could fill in the gaps, because there are gaps, right? The higher more responsibility you have, there's gonna be trade-offs at home. It just is. And then, so he did that for 5 years, right? Good for him. But I was with my granddaughter just yesterday, and she's wearing jeans that are like a little bit too big for her. And you could see her, like, her little pink underwear sometimes sticking out. So my other granddaughter said, Charlotte, you have to, pick up so that your underwear's not showing. And when I said to her, who cares if anybody sees your underwear at the top of your jeans? Like, if you want to see my underwear, go ahead. If somebody wants to look at my underwear when I'm walking up the stairs, what does that take from me? Nothing. It only takes something from me if I care enough about it to be valuable. So I might turn around and say, that person stopped looking at my dress, but they can't actually take something from me that I'm not willing to give them. So I think in TikTok videos and everything else, this idea of monetization, the value you're providing, whether you're getting it, it's so complicated that I wouldn't want to take a channel away from women for how they're empowering themselves, who they might not be able to make money in any other way.
Well, and I understand that,
Yeah.
but I would also say then, as women, because some mom, if Dr. Steininger hired this girl who at 18 or 19 was making TikTok videos to make money, and now she's an elementary school teacher.
Yep.
And some parent finds that video, and tell me if I'm not true, some parent is gonna call and complain that this person, how do you let this person become a teacher? How do you allow them to teach my student when this is what, even though they did it 5 years ago or whatever. So I think that's where everybody has to say, I can't complain, I can't say, yes, do what you wanna do and monetize and make your money, but I don't want you teaching my child. Or I don't want you, being a councilwoman because of something you did 10 years ago. So I think there's a balance on both sides of how we take that information and then turn around and say, it's great you want to monetize and that's how you're making your money and that's great. But oh no, you can't teach my kid, or you can't be a council person, or you can't be a town manager, or you can't be a principal because 20 years ago this is how you made your money, and that's awful that now these kids have to see this.
Right.
So I think there's a balance on both ends on how we react to that. If we wanna say it's okay, then we can't come back later and say, oh no, that I'm a parent, it's not okay.
Right.
Yeah, because I don't think it's realistic to think that, well, I have 2 young ladies in my home, and my husband and I probably have what people would consider to be atypical roles. He cooks most of the meals. I do the menu planning because I'm a control freak, but he executes. But we have conversations while I want them to be 100% who they are, but the world we live in doesn't always allow that. And that's unfortunate, and that's the hard conversation that ticks me off that I have to say sometimes, because there is this element of caution you do have to have. but I don't want it to take away from, I definitely don't want to take away who they are. It's just the savviness of it. And they're smart. They know they are who they are, trust me. But they're savvy. They know where to play. They know where they can't play that. Because of the people, not everyone shares the same sentiments we share. But, I mean, that's just the truth. And it ticks me off that I even have to have that conversation with them. But that is the reality.
I think then that means that part of our work is to, you know, do the best that we can to ensure that, you know, by the time my 6 and 8-year-old daughters grow up, that conversation doesn't need to be had.
Exactly, exactly. And that goes to my points at the end of all this is what can we do? It's the courage to have the conversations. It's the courage to put lips, not just stop the lip service. I'm so, I don't know if y'all know Brene Brown. I'm a huge fan of Brene Brown. And she's about courageous leadership. And I get so tired of sitting around the table having all these great conversations, but then the courage to do the things that are going to make a difference is exactly what it's going to be for your 6 and 8-year-old to not have to worry about being exactly who they are and who might misinterpret it.
You have to have uncomfortable conversations with
Yeah.
women, with men, and sometimes it's maybe with someone who's your supervisor at work like you did. And I think, you know, it's tough, right? It's like, why should you have to put yourself in a position that's not only uncomfortable, but could threaten your job? But, I mean, and I think a lot of it too is standing up for other people. If you're the person standing next to you and you see something happen to them, you have to have that hard conversation and say, why did you say that to them? I don't think that was appropriate.
Right.
And I think that's hard, and I'm not saying I do it all the time.
Yeah.
I'd like to, I'm trying to.
Well, and I think part of that is that there's like so the feminist killjoy, right, is this coin phrase from Sarah Amen, and it's this idea that like when you're the one who, you know, says to the uncle at Thanksgiving dinner who just made the super racist joke or the super misogynistic thing, and you go like, dude, that was terrible, like don't ever say that again, you know, I can't believe, well, you ruined Thanksgiving dinner, you know, you're the killjoy, you're the one who brought it up, you know, like, and it's
How about
this,
he ruined it, because he said that?
right, you know, and that's the thing, it's like, oh, it's all in good fun, you know, you know, someone makes super inappropriate jokes to you at work, and the best defense is when you say, well, what do you mean by that? Oh, it's just a joke. Well, explain it to me, because I don't find it funny. And then the jaw drops, and they don't know what to say, because it isn't a joke, right? But it's this idea that, like, when you're the one to start those difficult conversations, like, you know, systems in place, systems in power, especially of disenfranchised groups, like, they run on these disenfranchised groups pretending to be happy to maintain the status quo. So when you are the ones who break through that, then those systems crumble, because they are based on people who are too okay to, you know, push forward and pull down the barriers. So it is about, you know, you talk about responsible leadership and, you know, having the tough conversations, like, you're gonna get demonized if you're willing to put those rules in, but it's so vital and it's so necessary that, you know, like, this is why, you know, feminists are seen as angry and emotional, because we're not willing to just smile and nod and encourage the nice girl, you know.
Or boy, my husband's a feminist.
Well, yeah, but like that
Yeah.
women are supposed to be quiet and submissive and say, yes ma'am, yes sir, all the time, as opposed to just like, well, hang on, because I don't agree with that. That's like, even that sentence in any room is just kind of a, hang on a minute, you know, like, so those kind of moments you really do need to, you know, there is a level of courage that comes with being willing to make these changes.
And I think as you get the privilege to be in any kind of leadership, then you have to really stand up for the people who just have zero ability to do that. Like someone who is in a minimum wage job that if they lose it, they cannot pay rent, like they really can't stand up. And I feel like that's sometimes what's hard about like this, just empowering women to always stand up. And it's like, but we gotta recognize, like, you know, if we have, like, if you have some kind of leadership, yeah, you should be standing up, but also recognizing the people that can't, and that we have to stand up for them. And maybe we'll be in trouble, but, you know, maybe we can shoulder that better than they could.
Very good. I did want to come to you. I didn't forget you, Councilmember.
That's okay. And I wanted to respond to something too, when I was part of a discussion pretty recently when we were talking about the stereotype of a typical Southern woman, white woman, compared to the stereotype of a typical Black woman is very different. You know, white women, we tend to not rock the boat, we tend to sit back and try to keep the peace in general. That's the way that most of us were brought up. And my understanding with Black women is that you speak up, you say what you mean, and you say it with emphasis. And, you know, whenever we're confronted with that, we think, you know, it's been thought that it's angry when someone comes across that way, and it's not that way. It is just the difference in culture. So I thought I would bring that up since
Yeah.
You mentioned
Thank
that.
you, because I was definitely speaking from my perspective as the way that white women, you know, how
Sure.
we're supposed to be, and it's definitely not true for all different
And
groups.
I will say too, you know, just stepping back and talking about media in general, you know, we have definitely broken a lot of glass ceilings in media in general. When we first started out talking about print media, books, newspapers, magazines, different things like that, it was all men that wrote those articles and wrote those books and did those things. Same thing with TV. It started out being men. I mean, did you remember the first time you saw a woman on television as a news reporter, as an anchor? The first woman to write a book, those different things. Yes, we've come a long way, but I would say that we still, in my mind, there's positives and negatives to media in general when we're talking about women. The inclusivity has definitely increased, I would say, over the last several years. And we're talking about things like portraying a actual disabled person as disabled, you know, in that role. Having Asian people actually portray Asian women, not in stereotypes, but in their natural being. Same thing with Black women, with transgender women. You know, we're starting to see people take these roles that are actually meant to portray who they are. And previously that was not the case. We would have, and we still do, have white women portraying Asian women, or taking multiple roles when, you know, we really, I mean, it was inappropriate. It shouldn't have been. I would say too that the negativity, you know, women in general are not a monolith by any capacity. You know, when we were talking earlier, there was a lot of discussion about sexualizing women in media, and that typically, when you present yourself on stage, that's what you're doing, is you're sexualizing yourself, because that's the way people take you. And that's the discussion that I have to have with, I have two 14-year-old daughters, and they are on social media now. Everything that they put out there, they have to be very intentional with, and that's the discussion I have with them quite frequently. Whatever they post on social media, they have to know how people are going to, what assumptions people are going to make about them. You know, whether they are in full makeup, you know, or if they are plain faced. You know, if you don't wear makeup, then you're plain, and you know you're not trying, and all this type of stuff. If you wear makeup, then you're trying to sexualize yourself. And so those assumptions are things that I've had to have hard discussions with my kids about. And you know, I would also say, and this is kind of a little bit off subject in a way, but most of us here are wearing power jackets. That's what they call these. And there was a discussion in Congress, when was that, a couple of years ago, with Nancy Pelosi about, you know, you can't show your shoulders. It's a dress code issue in Congress. It's offensive to the men, and it might distract them from the thing. That was a discussion that Nancy had to have, because she was pulled aside and told that women had to cover their shoulders in the U.S. 2 years ago. You know, we tend to do things because it compares us to men. It puts us in that power realm, because it's the only way at that point in time time that we're going to be heard and accepted and our power realized. And until we're at the point where it doesn't matter what we're wearing, our words matter and our ideas matter more so than what we're wearing or how we portray ourselves, and then, I think that we're back to that equality issue. So.
Very good, thank you.
Can I say something on
Sure.
that? And I totally understand what you're saying. I guess I have just been very fortunate to be in a male-dominated field. Obviously I'm a type A personality because I do this for a living, and I have been to more than one very large meeting and been the only female, executive sitting in that meeting, and I am not afraid to speak my mind, and I'm not afraid to bring my point across. I have been very fortunate with my colleagues that I work with. They have been extremely supportive. I have never had them not, treat me like they weren't listening, or like I didn't feel like I was being heard, or I didn't feel like my idea was valued, or, being the senior captain, they come to me and say, hey, can I run this by you? Can you, can I flash this idea off of you? And so I get that it doesn't happen everywhere, but I do want to make the point that I have been very fortunate where I'm at, that I have male colleagues that are very supportive. I have had a supervisor say something to me that, I kind of thought was mean, and had a male colleague go to that supervisor and be like, that was wrong. You should have never said that. So I have been very fortunate to have had that support, and feel like, that support is there consistently for me in my role where I'm at. So, and I do think there's strides to be made, and it may be different in other career fields, but, I don't want to say that it's all negative, because for me, that's not what I've experienced where I'm at.
That's good to hear. It's always good to hear good news, and we're going to pivot to that. Let's talk about some good things. We've got about 10 or 12 minutes, right? So let's talk about, and you've hit on this some, how can we continue to support women and girls moving forward? What can our schools, community organizations, maybe faith communities do to help support girls and women moving forward? Any thoughts on this side?
I would say representation is the most important thing, and to me that's like the full scope. I'm talking fat women, I'm talking asexual and aromantic women, I'm talking transgender women, I'm talking women with short hair, people who identify as women who might be intersex, women who are loud and quiet, women, I want the full scope. I'm not just talking about, race, whatever. I want like all kinds of women, to show that they can be that way. This is just hilarious because it's one of those things where I look at myself and I go, what the heck? But my youngest still makes comments about how my girlfriend is the boy in our relationship because she has short hair. And I'm like, you're my child. Like, you're not allowed to say that sort of thing. Where did that come from? And it's just so blatantly there. And she knows plenty of women with short hair. Dr. Steininger goes to my church. You know what I mean? Like, she sees these people and I'm just going, what in the world? So the fact that there's so many typical things that, women are supposed to be like, let's just celebrate them all. And then that can give so much more confidence in the who you are and what, you don't have to look, act, think, whatever, dress a certain way. You can still be a woman if that's who you are.
So really celebrating diversity.
Yeah.
In any way.
Well, I think in just supporting each other, that's, at my level, there's not a lot of females, but, I'm all about supporting the younger officers and the civilian staff that we have, and, it's about supporting each other, and it doesn't have to be in the same career field, and, if you're having a bad day and your crown's a little crooked, it's my job to come straighten it up and say, hey, let's move forward. And that's, I think, the biggest thing is you've got to be there to support each other regardless, whether it's work, whether it's home, whether it's in a relationship, whatever it might be. You've got to be supportive and not be catty and not try to, cut them down and try to step over them to get ahead. I've always seen, the town has changed dramatically since I came, and we have so many more options now, and, I hear some, like now we have this paid paternal leave, which is great, didn't have it when I had my kids, but we have it now, and it's wonderful, and, I hear some people say, well, that's not fair, I didn't have it. Well, how about we just look at what's making it better for the women who come behind us? And not worry, because I didn't have it the easiest when I started, but I don't dwell on that, and I don't hold that, and I don't constantly relive that. I try to see it as, some of the things I went through made it much better for the women who are coming through my agency now. And that's what I work on, and that's what I work toward is, what can we do for the future that's gonna make it better than it is today? And I think that's lifting each other up and not dwelling on and being supportive and positive and, supporting, your friends' accolades or even your coworkers' accolades, something they've done, being supportive of that and telling them great job can go a long way to not feel like, because women can be very catty to each other, and that's our own fault. And that's where we've got to stop that and be more supportive.
I think you hit on a good point, which we haven't got to talk about yet, which I think the single biggest change we need to make is guaranteed paid maternity leave. I mean, that's just a barrier that no matter how much you say that you want to hire women and lift them up and whatever, there are just so many jobs where, they say, there's FMLA. FMLA is unpaid. It is 12 weeks of unpaid. And the way that translates is you're not gonna get fired. At least not officially fired for being pregnant, but we might fire you for something else.
You also
That's not enough.
can
Like,
go down in job level.
yeah, it's barely anything. It's like we're gonna sort of check to see if you weren't fired for being pregnant. But people say you get 12 weeks, unpaid 12 weeks. So I just think that that's like a minimum to me. And obviously it should extend to men, and we should make men comfortable with taking it. Everywhere I've worked, they do these studies where they give it out and barely any men take it. And it should be available to everyone, no matter how your children are coming into this world. Adoption, it doesn't matter, who your partner is, you're a single mother, and everyone should be getting that. But at a bare minimum, we have to have paid maternity leave. And I think as far as our kids, looking back to how we can change things for them, I just think we have to stop things as they're so gendered from the beginning. Everything is girls versus boys, and I know that's sort of natural, but even like, I did a joint birthday party and the other mom said like, so we probably just need to invite the boys in the class, right? My son, my oldest is a boy, and I said, why would that be the distinction? I say invite everyone, or I guess if you can only have two people, maybe it's your best friends, no matter who they're boy or girl, but why is everything from the beginning boy versus girl, which also doesn't allow for gender non-binary individuals to have a place? I mean, I just think that, and that's every day, that, you're talking about like always having to have these conversations with your kids where they have assumptions, they're kids, they see in media, men are this, women are this, and it's just a constant conversation where you say like, if they ever say, well, that person's, a girl, so she's probably a nurse, not a doctor. You say, no, like what makes you think that? And let's talk about it.
But that's our role as parents.
Right,
Because
exactly.
My 11-year-old, his best friend is a girl, and they've been BFFs since they were in preschool together, and and they want to have a sleepover, and it's kind of this. They're her mom, and I have talked about it, and for them, they just want to have a sleepover. They're just two kids who are BFFs who want to have a sleepover. She comes to our house, he goes to her house, and I hate to have that conversation about why somebody else might think it's inappropriate that you go spend the night over there. But we've tried very hard in our house not to talk about race and sex and all that kind of stuff. My best friend of 30 years is a gay man, and he's married to a man. I love him to death. He was at my house today. My kids love him. My kids know that he's gay. My kids know that he's married to a man. But they don't think twice about it because we've not made it a big topic or made it something that they should see negatively. So
Kids don't know that something's not how it's supposed to
Until you
be
tell
if it's
them that.
always how it's been, right?
Right.
It's only when you've only presented them one view that all of a sudden they get to be a certain age and they've never had an interaction with whatever type of person it is, that it really, if it's always there and it's always celebrated and supported and everyone is there together, it makes a big difference. It's hard to make up for representation just in who you're around. And I think a lot of people need to be better about that. They talk a lot about representation at work and whatever, but then they go out in their sort of regular life and they're around all the same people as them.
Yeah, and my kids just don't even think twice about it. They just, you know, my older son called me and he's like, hey, Mr. Rick's over here. Do you know he's working on? He's refinishing the table for me. And I said, oh yeah. And he's like, okay. Yeah, I don't have any concerns about them being around my children. I would leave them. I would let them watch my. You know, I don't have any concerns. And some people find that odd that I'm not concerned about. I'm not. I trust him with my children just as much as I would trust my son's best friend's mom. But when you don't make it an issue and don't talk about it like it's something to be concerned about or something to be, that it's different, then it's not different. And I hate that, you know, we've been pushing off this want to spend the night thing, and it's not because we're concerned, it's more like, what are people, you know, unfortunately, I've had that same thing, like, what are somebody going to think? Because my son wants to go have a sleepover with this little girl that's his best friend, and, you know, they're 11. You know?
That's it. I think from an early age, we focus too much on this weird sort of romantic. This
They
is like an
can't just be
aside, but
friends.
like if your baby's 6 months old and my baby's 6 months old and they're sitting next to each other, can you not say that like that's his girlfriend?
Yeah.
They're just babies.
All right, we've got about 5 minutes left, so I'm gonna go ahead and shift to some of our last couple questions. I'm gonna put them into one. Any concluding thoughts about any initiatives you want to share that you're doing that's promoting positively or positively impacting girls and women, or how we move forward in the next 5 to 10 years? Final thoughts, let's start here.
Okay. So at Olive Chapel, we have a girls who, we all get real practical. And it's Girls Who Code Club. That's something that it actually, I have a STEM teacher who's a woman, and that's an elective that we created. It doesn't exist automatically in Wake County. And our girls were like, you know, we want our own club. And so we established this Girls Who Code Club, and we brought women women engineers in to help support that too. So we're really trying to help. I'm a mathematician by trade. That was my first. I was a math teacher, and I hate it when I hear young women say, "I hate math." I mean, it's a carryover from years past, but it still exists. You don't hear young men saying that much. We do hear young women say it, and so we're trying to dispel that. The other thing, so there's the equity department in our Wake County has done a Young Women's Leadership Conference, and I presented at that before. This year was virtual, and able to do it, but I love the work that they're doing there. Personally, I'm a leadership coach. I do, my wheelhouse is mostly for women. I'm a certified leadership coach, and I do mastermind classes for women and that. But there's some great organizations out there doing some stuff with young women. The North Carolina Girls STEM Collaborative, the Triangle Women in STEM. I mean, I know that's related to mathematics, but that's kind of my wheelhouse. But there is some good work being done out there.
Very good. Anybody else?
I just want to quickly talk about philanthropy, right? The power of the purse. And this is where my passion is, that we need to control the dollars that we're giving away in our families and work with our partners, our husbands, our boyfriends, whoever it is, to say, what do we care about and how are we supporting it? Because money matters, right? How much you make, how much you give away, who you're helping. Some of our conversation today, and of course naturally because we're in the roles, or previously we're in the roles that we're in, start from here. The women that I'm worried about are the ones who don't have a car and don't have a grocery store in their neighborhood and couldn't take their kid who has a fever to the doctor because they have to ride the bus to school, pick their kid up at school, get them on the bus, bring them, it's a day off work, it's bus fare, right? So for me, philanthropy is about the people who haven't gotten here yet. My interest in women's rights is about women who are still disenfranchised within a women's rights movement. And so that's what I'm passionate about and where I give money and what I hope we will all think about as we come away from this.
Thank you.
I think the comment earlier about representation matters is so very important in so many different ways. If you don't see yourself in these roles, then a lot of people can't imagine themselves in those roles. You don't think you belong. So my biggest and most important thing to think is challenge those assumptions at so many different levels. You know, I've had so many different classrooms, kids reach out to me in different ways to talk about what I do, you know, to see if that's something they want to do later in life. And whether that's as an OT, an occupational therapist, or as a council member, you know, they need to see themselves in these roles, these important in-charge roles, so that those things are what they can aspire to. You know, when I first ran for office, one of the first things that I heard from a man when I was canvassing is, who's gonna watch the kids? You know, and it's still, that type of assumption assumes, first of all, that my husband is not a father, that he is just a babysitter there that watches the kids occasionally when I'm doing something else. And we didn't even get into talking about men's roles in that way earlier, but you know, I think that's important to challenge those assumptions on different levels.
Thank you. Anybody on this side, concluding comments, where we go from here?
I would just say I agree that I think that the biggest thing is to, you know, make sure we're talking about the whole other part of the conversation, which is the women who have not gotten to get beyond just getting by. I do a lot of work with the Poor People's Campaign, and obviously, you know, I just think it's really important to hear those stories, and that one of the most important things that I feel like we do at work that I think everyone should do more of is just always going to the people who are directly impacted and letting them tell their stories. If we're gonna have a conference about women in the criminal justice system, I will not be speaking. Someone who has been in the criminal justice system will be speaking. You know, the people who are gonna speak at Poor People's Campaign events, you know, we just had one in Raleigh, and it was people who are earning minimum wage right now and can talk about what that's like. And so I think that, you know, we talked about just always giving space for other women, just making sure that, like, you know, we're gonna speak for ourselves and lift ourselves up, but also make sure that we're allowing that space when it's not like our turn to really talk on something.
Quickly, any last comments? All right, thank you all so much, and thank you for those who have joined us. This has been our inaugural panel discussion for Women's History Month, and I hope there will be many more. Thank you again for joining us.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Oh, it's a pleasure meeting you too. Don't you want to just be like, come over for dinner?
I know,
Right?
Let's just go out for a drink.
I know, like,